Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Arirang TV's continuing special coverage of COVID-19. I'm Min Sun-hee. The number of infections worldwide has surpassed 18 million, and the global health body believes the situation will worsen. Here in Korea, the number of local transmissions is down to a fresh low in weeks, but import cases remain a concern. I have Kwon So-ah with the latest numbers on the pandemic and our Yoon Jung-min with related economic figures. First, So-ah, what are the numbers for this Monday here in Korea?
Well, Sonny, we've got some relieving news this Monday as the country recorded its lowest number of domestic COVID-19 transmissions in almost 3 months. But infections from abroad still remain in the double digits. So let's take a closer look at the figures. We have 23 new cases and only 3 of those are local transmissions, while the other 20 are infections from abroad. The death toll hasn't changed over the weekend, now at 301. We have 2 more people in quarantine and 21 new recoveries. And let's take a look at how the situation developed over the past week. Now, this Monday's figure 23 is not that different from last Monday, but we also have to note that usually we have less COVID-19 tests conducted over the weekend. So the number can rise as the week progresses. Let's hope it won't, though. But good to see that the number is on a gradual decline since last Friday. And let's move over to our map now. We have 5 new cases in the capital, Seoul, and 2 of those are local infections. We also have 1 local case in Gyeonggi province. The rest are infections from overseas. And also, according to the government earlier, 20 of the imported cases today appear to be from 10 different countries, and that includes 4 from Bangladesh, 4 from Russia, 2 from the US, and also 2 from Japan.
Right, so speaking about Japan, cases there have been rebounding in recent days.
Right, according to Japan's media, the cases are nearing 40,000 now in Japan. On Sunday alone, the country reported over 1,300 new infections, and with that, it's seeing daily cases at over 1,000 for the 5th consecutive day.
Right, but Japan is not the only nation that's dealing with a rebounding cases, though.
Exactly. Korea's government earlier at the morning briefing said that Asian countries like Japan, Hong Kong, and Vietnam are seeing these new outbreaks, which in many cases is due to on the back of loosened restrictions. And Japan, for instance, also had lifted its state of emergency in late May. And with that, let's take a look at countries which are seeing cases in more than tens of thousands on a daily basis. We're talking about the US, Brazil, and India here having 4.8 million, 2.7 million, and 1.8 million cases. Also a concern, South Africa now with over 511,000 cases in total. Let's move over to our next table. Quite a change of order here. We have Colombia at over 317,000 cases, surpassing Iran and the UK, and Iran also has recently surpassed UK's cases, now at some 309,000 infections. And with that, the number of total cases around the globe stands at over 18.2 million, and we have almost 700,000 fatalities and 11.4 million recoveries. And that's the updates I have for now, but I'll be back after the afternoon government briefing. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for that. I'll see you back at the desk. On the economic front, second quarter GDP figures have been published by the world's major economies. With the exception of China, they've all posted some of their worst performances on record because of COVID-19. For more on this, I have Yoon Jung-min here in the studio with me. Welcome, Jung-min.
Hello, Sunny.
Right, Jung-min, let's start with Korea then. How did the local economy fare during the second quarter?
That's right. So unfortunately, the performance was actually worse than the previous quarters. While Korea posted its worst figures in over 2 decades, this is mostly because of this coronavirus outbreak hammering the country's exports. So if you take a look at the preliminary figures over here, it was released by the Bank of Korea. South Korea's GDP was down over 3% on quarter. It was the lowest since 1998 amid the Asian financial crisis. On year, the economy contracted 2.9%. South Korea's growth largely depends on exports, but unfortunately, outbound shipments plummeted over 16%. Imports also fell more than 7%. The Bank of Korea explained that exports were down due to travel restrictions and lockdowns overseas amid the pandemic. It also said that there has been a sharp decline in overseas demand for cars and smartphones. Take a look at what an analyst had to say.
It was largely expected that the economy would bottom out in the second quarter. What matters now is the second half of this year. The pace of recovery in that period will determine this year's overall growth rate.
On a rather brighter note, however, private consumption rebounded during that period. It appears the government's supportive measures played a hand, including COVID-19 relief funds and a lower sales tax on cars. In June, overall industrial output went up by over 4%. Also, retail sales and investment all jumped when compared to the previous month. South Korea expects a turnaround in the next quarter. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi commented that the performance was worse than expected due to external shocks, but the country will see a rebound in the third quarter if it keeps the COVID-19 situation in check.
Right, let's keep our fingers crossed for that rebound. Chongmin, how did the U.S. fare during the second quarter?
Well, the same as in the U.S. economy also saw the biggest plunges ever. The Commerce Department said last week that its GDP from April to June plummeted almost 33% at an annualized rate. On quarter, it fell down over 9%. That was the worst drop since 1947. This was due to the effect of lockdowns on consumer spending, which accounts for 2/3 of all economic activity in the U.S. And the shutdowns have taken a toll on exports and investment, not to mention having caused massive unemployment. Some economists predict the U.S. economy could see slow growth rates, and it could take some time to recover due to ongoing concerns over COVID-19. Take a listen.
And it's going to take years, not months, to recover that. But here's how the numbers work. You have a 33% contraction, you need a 50% expansion to get back to break even.
As for the third quarter, the U.S. is likely to see a rebound, with experts saying the economy really bottomed out in Q2. But the recovery may be limited and slower due to the surging number of coronavirus cases there. Ahead of the U.S. presidential election this November, President Trump and his administration will for sure do all they can to bolster growth for the third quarter.
Well, let's hope their efforts bear fruit. All right, Chongmin, what about neighboring China? I understand it saw a different picture.
That's right, Sunny. So unlike other global economies, China has much rebounded from the shocking figures in Q1. China's National Bureau of Statistics said that its economy grew over 3% on year from April to June. This followed as the end of a lockdown in Beijing and bolstered stimulus measures to tackle the impact of the pandemic. Watchers say their performance exceeded market expectations. In the first quarter, China saw a 6.8% contraction in its GDP. It seems China's economy is back on track, but the Bureau said a hard battle lies ahead due to the growing number of COVID-19 cases at home and abroad. Take a look.
We are confident that the economy will continue to recover in the second half of the year. However, currently, the epidemic situation overseas is still spreading rapidly. The global economy and trade is struggling to get started again.
So it really depends on how the world contains the coronavirus.
Right, Chongmin, one final place before I let you go today. What about the situation in Europe then?
Sure, like more other countries have recently published their latest growth figures, but things are not looking good. Well, last week, Germany said its economy shrank by around 10% on quarter. It's something that hasn't happened since 1970. This was because investment, exports, and spending all came to a standstill due to border closures and restricted social and economic activity since March. As for Hong Kong, its economy contracted by 9% on year during the same period. It's already bad, but some economists worry that the next quarter could be worse because of this forecasted third wave of the pandemic in the city. France also released its latest figure, and its economy was down almost 14%.
Right, Chongmin, thank you for that coverage. Hope to see you again soon then.
Thank you for having me.
Right, we turn now to the regular government briefing on COVID-19 here in Korea, where the daily numbers have been hovering in the 30s since last Friday, with a majority of those cases coming in from overseas. Local transmissions have been noting single digits from this past Saturday, with 8 then, 8 again on Sunday, and 3 today. In fact, authorities point out that the 3 domestic cases recorded on this Monday is the lowest since May 8th, when Korea recorded 1 local infection. Despite the relatively comforting numbers, officials are calling for continued caution amid escalating cases in other parts of the world and the summer vacation season here in Korea, during which authorities believe many may not strictly abide by the safety precautions currently in place. Officials believe the month of August will prove to be pivotal in determining whether current containment efforts are sufficient in Korea to keep the virus at bay. Also, in related news, a new cluster infection at a coffee place in southern Seoul is raising alarm, as it is reportedly the first such case at a cafe here in the capital city. As of early this morning, a total of 9 related cases have been disclosed. Meanwhile, the briefing has yet to commence, and perhaps while we wait for that, we can take a look at the guidelines drawn up by the government to ensure safety this summer at the beach among those who choose to seek refuge from the heat by the sea. First up, visitors are advised to choose smaller beaches, places that are less crowded and less popular among the crowds. Visitors should also keep gatherings from being too large. I understand the briefing has started. We'll come back to you afterwards.
Let us now begin our regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. As of August 3rd, we have a total of 3 new local infections and 20 new imported cases. And the accumulated number of confirmed cases now stands at 14,389. A total of 21 more people have been discharged following full recovery, and about 93% have been recovered, and a total of 808 people are in quarantine. There are 13 people with severe or critical conditions. We had no additional fatalities. Here are some updates on our major domestic infections. In relation to a coffee place in Gangnam-gu District, Seoul City, we have 1 additional case, and the total is 10. And we have been carrying out the epidemiological investigation for the camping site in Hongcheon, and we have identified that about on the July 21st, this person has been staying at these coffee shop in Gangnam-gu District for about 30 minutes before showing slight symptoms, and so we are conducting our epidemiological investigations. And as for the camping site, we have 1 additional case, and the total now stands at 10. And as for the imported cases, we have some updates. As of yesterday, we have 20 new imported cases, and 14 of them have been reported at points of entry, while 6 people have been reported while on self-quarantine. 14 were South Koreans, while 6 were as foreigners. 2 were from US, 1 from Mexico, 2 from Algeria, and also 4 from Bangladesh, 4 from Russia, and 2 from the Philippines, and 2 were from Japan. And the KSDC, we have identified some of the quarantine measures and risk factors during the past 2 weeks, and they are as follows. During the past 2 weeks, looking at the sources of infection, we have identified that 62.1% are imported cases, and the domestic cluster infections amount to 18.4%, and 6.6% or 41 cases are under investigation, and 1.9% are imported cases as well among that. And looking at the sources of infection for the past 4 weeks, we have seen a surge and a decline in the imported cases, and we have seen a large decline in the number of local transmissions. And as for the imported cases, looking at the 2 weeks, we have about 27 of them on a daily basis, which has been decreased slightly from the previous 2 weeks. And this, in order to contain the virus going forward, we have identified 6 countries as high-risk countries, and also we are restricting the issuance of visas as well as flights, and we are mandating all of the foreign entrants to submit a PCR PCR negative document, and we are extending our diagnostic testings for our foreign entrants as well. To this end, we will be decreasing. We will expect to see a decrease in the number of imported cases from overseas. And starting from today, all of the sailors from the high-risk countries as well as Russia, they need to submit a PCR negative testing document within 48 hours of departure. And going forward, we will also look deeply and closely into the cases of the global cases of COVID-19, and we will assess the risk factors of each countries, and also we will make measures that are necessary going forward. And next, here are some of the updates on the domestic infections. And during the past 2 weeks, we have seen on average 16.9 cases of the local infections on a daily basis, which is a decrease by 4.9 on a daily basis. And during the past 2 weeks as well, we have looked at the age groups, the distribution of age. We have seen that there were 8.9 which among the people of over the age of 60. However, it decreased largely to about 4%. And we have also seen an increase in the number of cases, especially among the middle age group. And we are seeing a decline in the Chungcheong and the Jeollanam-do province as well. However, we are seeing cluster infections and sporadic infections at camping sites as well as a coffee place here in the metropolitan area. And in order to contain the virus going forward, we have been identifying 12 facilities as high-risk facilities, and they include clubs and PC cafes as well. And we are intensifying our on-site inspections. And as for the movie cinemas and sports stadium, we are also carrying out our regular inspection on site, and we are urging the people to continue to comply with our social distancing measures, including wearing a face mask and keeping 2 meters of distance. And we ask the members of the public to continue to remember that COVID-19 can spread at any place which is confined, crowded, and close contact environment. Therefore, you should refrain from going to multi-use facilities like nightlife venues as well as other multi-use facilities. And during the summer vacation, we ask you to go on vacation by family units and if possible for a short duration of time, and always comply with the quarantine measures. During the past week, we had 2 fatalities. One was in the 70s and one in the 80s. And the fatality by ages, over the age of 80, it was about 84%. And we have seen the sources of the fatality, and one is under investigation, and one was in relation to the Gyeonggi-do Province Sihung Nursing Hospital. And we have a total of 301 death toll right now, and the major causes were stemming from the hospitals and nursing hospitals as well, which amounted to about 54.4%. And the KCDC, we also continue to note that we have been resuming the operations of social welfare services. So we ask you, if you are working at these social welfare services as well, we ask you to continue to take precautions. And if you are the managers at these sites, we ask you to disinfect frequently touched areas and also shared objects like wheelchairs and doorknobs. And we ask you to refrain from engaging in activities that increase droplet infections, and always sit in a zigzag form, so you can also decrease the level of droplets infections. And we ask you, if you have symptoms, do not go to work, and also get tested as soon as possible if you have symptoms. And also refrain from multi-use facilities like PC rooms, singing rooms, and clubs, so forth. And we ask you to refrain from going to small meetings and gatherings as well. Always, we ask you to continue to wear your face mask and wash your hands on a regular basis. And as for the users, if you have respiratory symptoms or fever, please get tested as soon as possible. And also within the facility, continue to wash your hands on a regular basis and wear your face mask as well. And we have seen continued heavy rainfall, and we have some measures for the particular precautions for the public. And in order to contain the virus from spreading further, we ask you to also comply with the safety precautions, even if you are at the temporary shelter places for those who have evacuated from the heavy rainfall. And we will continue to carry out strict compliance with the quarantine measures, as well as a strict entry log of the visitors, and also disinfect the frequently touched areas as well. And also, as for the users who are staying in this facility, always wear your face mask and refrain from engaging in activities that increase the risks of droplet infections. And aside from COVID-19, we also have an infections of the waterborne diseases. And please cook your food well before you eat, and also continue to carry out your sanitization as well. Thank you very much.
그럼 지금부터 기자님들 질문 답변.
Right, that was Chong Young, the head of KCDC, with Monday's afternoon briefing. So, what was the gist of her briefing?
Well, first off, although we have a really quite a decline in local infections, it looks like we have new locations emerging as possible high-risk facilities, because we have some 10 cases related to a coffee shop in southern Seoul, and we recently are also seeing cases at restaurants and also camping sites. So that is why the government is expected to release some new measures, especially regarding how to abide by quarantine measures at coffee shops, and also because we are having still double-digit figures when it comes to imported cases. Beginning today, all sailors coming from Russia, all crewmen must submit a certificate that shows that they tested negative for COVID-19 in the past 48 hours before entering Korea. Meanwhile, the average daily local infections in the past 2 weeks stands at some 16.9, and that's down from 21.4 the previous 2 weeks. So we are seeing a decline there. But imported cases remain at 27.3 on average in the past 2 weeks, as the previous 2 weeks were at 27.7. So really no big change there. And last but not least, as we are seeing heavy downpours here in the country, Chong Eun-kyung, the KCDC chief, also mentioned that people who are currently at shelters as they evacuated from the heavy rain should also try to wear face masks while they're there, and also comply by the quarantine measures.
Right, so thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Elsewhere around the world, a state of disaster was declared in Australia's second most populous state of Victoria yesterday, along with fresh lockdown measures to contain a resurgence of COVID-19. I have Park Min, a resident there, live on the line with more details. Welcome, Min.
Hi.
Now, it's winter there in Australia, and the virus appears to have re-emerged with a vengeance. Yesterday, that is Sunday, Victoria recorded 671 infections and 7 fatalities, if I'm not mistaken. Now, please do tell us about the severity of the situation there, Min, and perhaps the reason behind the latest surge in infections.
Yes, all those speculations about the seasonal influence of the COVID-19 is pretty much irrelevant now, because even the countries in the northern hemisphere, we still keep seeing increased number of confirmed cases. And yes, we had more than 700 confirmed cases, which is breaking the new record as well. And then especially the Victoria taking most part of it, with more than 600 confirmed cases in a single day. About the cause of this new spike, no one really has a clear answer to it. Apparently, there was quite a bit of number of cases from the famous Black Lives Matter protest. However, I don't think it's a case of a single event to blame. It's more about people became more careless over the course of several months of the lockdown. Yeah.
Min, in response to this grave reality, the government, I understand, has imposed fresh lockdown measures. Do tell us more about these measures then.
Yes, from yesterday, the level of warning raised from state of emergency to state of disaster, which means your all outdoor activity has been restricted strongly, and they also impose a new curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. Where they restrict your outdoor activities during the time unless you have essential reasons. And then also there's been spot fine of $200 if you don't wear the mask in the public places.
So masks have become mandatory then?
Yes, and that kind of, that's quite interesting and contradictory at the same time, because the Australian government was pretty against the wearing mask even just a month ago. And then all the experts advised not to wear the mask unless you are really, really sick. And now they're enforcing everyone to wear a mask, and that causes a lot of confusion among people.
I see. Now, Min, in light of the pandemic, the Australian Open has been postponed, with organisers looking at dates in early 2021. I suppose it's not just golf that's been affected, but other sports as well.
Yes, it's been postponed till 2021, which means the event for this year is pretty much cancelled. And all other famous sports, including Formula Ones and football, and with many of crowds involved, have been cancelled as well. But in the past several months, the Formula One restarted for a couple of rounds now, and then football also has returned to the field without spectators. However, there was only just till this second spike in Australia. So I'm not sure what kind of decision will be made in the future. We'll have to see about that.
Right, we'll probably just have to wait and see. I mean, there are many Korean nationals and students living in Australia. How are they faring amid the latest outbreak there?
Yeah, in most of the young folks staying in Australia was having the working holiday visas, and working holidays take big part of especially the hospitality industry. And then at the beginning of this pandemic, a lot of those businesses closed down. So those guys having difficulties finding jobs and getting support from local government because they're not really eligible for it. So most of them had no choice but going back to their own country. And now, while all those businesses slowly trying to get back to their operation, the situation is the other way around. Now they are struggling to find actual workers.
I see. All right, Min, thank you for making the time to join us live at this hour with your thoughts.
No problem. Thank you.
Right, here on the local front, as part of efforts to ensure a sense of normality, authorities recently permitted the opening of sports stadiums. In this next video, we take a look at the measures aimed at keeping safety and spirits up at these venues.
정부의 사회적 거리두기 지침뿐만 아니라 그간 준비해온 자체 매뉴얼을 철저히 준수하면서 관중석의 10% 수준의 관중 입장을 허용합니다.
On August 1st, the K-League held Korea's first football matches with live spectators since the COVID-19 outbreak began, at 6 venues across the country. In the city of Seongnam, around 1,200 fans showed up to watch a game between Seongnam FC and Seoul FC.
작년 마지막 라운드 보고 이제 올해 처음 오는 건데 그래도 한 8개월, 9개월 만에 이제 처음 오는 거잖아요. 그래서 직관 되게 오래 기다렸고 굉장히 보고 싶었던 경기인데
프로축구 경기가 시작을 했는데도 입장을 하지 못하고 그래서 저희가 너무 답답하고 애들도 경기장 너무 보러 가고 싶어 했는데 이제 관중이 좀 시작되고 저 이렇게 다시 탄천에서 선수들 볼 수 있다는 게 너무 기쁘게 생각합니다.
Tickets can only be purchased in advance online, and those entering the venues must wear face masks, get their temperatures checked, and verify their identities with a QR code. The K-League is leaving nothing to chance as they welcome back spectators amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
경기 시작 한 4시간 전에 다 소독을 다 했고 저희가 이제 곳곳에 보이시지만 손 세정제라든가 이런 부분 다 준비했고 저희가 1m 이상씩 간격을 하도록 다 발밑에 다 표시를 하고 거기에도 안전요원을 배치해서 거리를 다 준수를 하면서 이용을 하시게끔 그렇게 준비를 했습니다.
3 months into the 2020 K-League season that kicked off in May, the once empty stands have been filled with football fans once again. However, strict precautionary measures are now in place. In order to prevent the spread of respiratory droplets, spectators are not allowed to sing or cheer while watching a game.
저는 입소문이 안 되다 보니까 구단에서 이런 깃발 같은 거를 제공해줘가지고 그걸 흔들면서 응원했습니다.
Also, minimum social distances must be kept within the stands, with fans being required to keep at least 2 empty seats between them. Away team supporters are not allowed into the stadiums to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 from region to region. Also, popular stadium snacks such as fried chicken have been banned, and fans are not allowed to bring food into the venues, aside from water and soft drinks.
저 아이도 지금 오면은 또 주전거리 같은 것도 하는 걸 되게 좋아하는데 친구들랑도 만나서 같이 놀기도 하거든요. 근데 그런 걸 못 하니까 지금 얘도 되게 많이 불편하죠.
The Korea Baseball Organization was the country's first professional sports league to reopen its venues to live spectators, starting on July 26. The KBO has also come up with new ways for spectators to cheer on their teams, and the cheerleaders have a heavy responsibility on their shoulders to encourage fans to support their teams and to ensure their own safety and of those around them at the same time.
말을 하다 보면 이제 그런 것들에 문제들이 생기니까 그래서 지금은 거의 박수와 동작으로 많이 하고 있고요. 제가 단상에서 계속 말씀을 드리고 그다음에 경기가 끝날 때도 사회적 거리 두기를 하셔야 되니까 나가실 때도 천천히.
With singing and chanting prohibited in the stands, fans are bringing an assortment of tools to support their teams in silence.
저 이렇게 응원봉이랑 유니폼 입고 왔어요. 좀 편하게 응원할 수 있고 아무래도 소리 못 내다 보니까 좀 더 선수들한테 전달하려고.
지금 관중의 10%만 들어오지만 이 정도 들어오는 것만 해도 되게 감사해야 될 일이 아닌가. 빨리 코로나가 종식이 돼가지고 이 야구장이 24,000명이 꽉 차가지고 다 같이 응원하는 그런 날이 왔으면 좋겠습니다.
The world of sports has had a tumultuous year, and it is only now starting to reopen its doors to eager spectators. But the real challenge has only just begun. What can sporting leagues do to ensure the safety and well-being of its fans?
In today's studio session, we take a look at the changes in professional sports amid the pandemic as organizers seek to ensure the health of their players and their fans as well. I have baseball commentator Min Hoon-gi here in the studio. Good to see you again, Mr. Min.
Nice seeing you again.
And I also have football journalist Ryan Walters here in the studio. Hello, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Ryan, we'll start with you then. Professional football fans were able to go back to the stadium this past weekend. How was this opening received by the football community as a whole?
Yeah, I think the weather didn't help much this weekend, but I think despite of that, we saw some pretty good numbers. It is capped at 10% right now. But with that, we did see really good turnout in a lot of places. Jeonbuk, I think, had almost 3,000 people down in Jeonju. And I think the fans are just happy to be able to go back in. In a year that everything's very surreal, it's nice to have something that's comfortable, something that's familiar. And even though we have to sit 2 seats apart and all the measures of getting in, I think it's a little bit of normalcy. And also for fans, it's being part of the team. Even if you can't shout, even if we can't sing, I think it's a really, really welcome change. And I know that's the case for the players as well, because they really miss the fans being in there.
Right. Mr. Min, baseball for its part marked an early opening in late July, I believe. Foreign reporters covered this event, and what was the response?
Well, actually, the opening day of 2020 season was May the 5th. There were like 30 Korean medias and 17 international medias covers the first day of the baseball. And this time around, it was 26th of July. We have a similar situation. We only have 3 stadiums open that night,
But like AP, Reuters, CNN, AFP, and some Japanese American media and covers it. And even UPI asked the Commissioner Chung the interviews for the fan opening spectators. It was only 10%, but it seems like the stadium was full. It was an exciting night.
I'm sure it was, right? Ryan, professional leagues elsewhere around the world appear to remain far from resumption, quite a lot of them, of course. Let's talk about something more gloomy now. What is the impact of the pandemic on the global sports market?
Yeah, I think it's a massive impact. And when we're talking about leagues having to shut down entirely, I think we're starting to see how much fans impact the game and how much that attendance impacts the game. Luckily, from a footballing perspective, FIFA had what they've called a war chest for a long time. It was about $4 billion is what it's believed, and they've opened up about 1.3 billion of that they're going to be giving out in grants and no interest loans for different federations. So when an organization as big as FIFA is opening things up like that, I think that shows the scope of it from a footballing perspective. And luckily here in K-League in Korea, we've at least been able to get back to playing. And like you say, that's not even the case with a lot of leagues. So this year there's been a massive impact, but I think next year especially is when we're really going to see how much things have changed, because a lot of the K-League clubs have their budget allocated at the beginning of the year. And so this year is somewhat normal in that way. But next year, those projections are going to be based on 2020. So 2021 is going to be a really, really different story. And I think the impacts are going to be felt for a really long time.
And speaking about the K-League, it's also struggling financially, of course, and it's in the process, I understand, of drawing up guidelines for actions.
Yes, it was believed that, it was reported that there was an attempt at a league-wide plan, something that would be in place for all K-League 1 and K-League 2 clubs. That was reported to be about a 10% salary cut for players. So players' salary accounts for 60 to 70% of a club's budget, so it's a massive chunk. But those negotiations broke down, and so now it's down to individual clubs and players to negotiate that drop. There will have to be some kind of cut, I think, because of the fewer games, of the fewer advertising opportunities. So there'll have to be some kind of cut, but I think any measure that was going to be done across the board, I don't think was really going to work when we have clubs like Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors spending millions, and then we have clubs like FC Anyang that are a citizen club that are dependent on government money. So there's not one thing that fits for both of those kind of clubs, but I think each club will be able to figure out something that works for them, but it is going to have to definitely be a reduction.
I see. Mr. Min, over in baseball, the Korea Baseball Organization signed a deal with U.S. broadcaster ESPN back in May to air some of the organization's games, of course. Now, observers had hoped that this deal would serve to that is offset some of the expected losses, but I understand this has not been the case.
No, actually no. ACLA had a tough negotiation with the ESPN until the last minute. And they finally, ESPN agreed with the broadcasting KBO League games, but ACLA and KBO teams make almost no profits out of it. And almost 70 games without spectators, it's very tough. Each KBO team's already lost way more than 100-1 so far, way more. And so far, some teams are financial trouble right now. And even KBO canceled more than 100 minor league games because of the financial trouble. And it's very great news that the fans are coming back to the stadium, but 10% of the fans is not going to help the teams financially. And soccer has like FIFA, international organization, but it's only KBO and the teams. So like Ryan said, this year is very tough, maybe tougher next year, and it's going to go on.
I see. Prospects don't look too bright then.
No, not really.
Ryan, now for games like football and baseball that are played outdoors, they have started to welcome back fans, albeit in limited capacity. But indoor games like basketball and volleyball, chances are very low that they'll be allowed to have spectators because these are indoor games, and the government has spoken about concerns of allowing people into confined spaces. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is one of the few areas where in K-League we always talk about how it's a burden to play in these World Cup stadiums that have 50, 60,000 capacity. We're finally seeing that be a benefit. where 10% in a 60,000 person stadium, we can get 5,000, 6,000 fans in. And in the cases of some teams like JG United, they play in a World Cup stadium, their average attendance isn't even 10%. So they might be able to get back to what they used to be. They average, I think, a little over 3,500 fans last year. They're in K-League 2, so the attendance will be down a little bit. So they are already potentially at their usual attendance figures, whereas, like you say, indoors, usually that's a benefit, right? Usually for basketball, usually for hockey, any sport that we have inside, you got that nice close atmosphere, but right now, that's a huge burden and there's no airflow in there. And so even if people are sitting apart, it's still an indoor stadium. So everything's going to stay contained. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen baseball and football come back, because it is an open air stadium. And again, specifically with K-League, we finally are seeing a benefit of these massive stadiums where we could have even 20,000 fans at Seoul World Cup Stadium and still have them spread out with 40,000 empty seats in there. So there's a big benefit to being an outdoor sport right now, definitely.
So it's not one seat apart, it's two seats apart then?
Yes, usually. I think it's still being figured out. It should be two, and I think the only case when it's one is if you go with a family. So then it only needs to be one, but then if there's somebody else, it would need to be two seats across.
Right. Ms. Timon, what are your thoughts on the preventative measures by the local authorities at stadiums, which essentially did allow them to open up their their baseball and football stadiums to spectators?
Right. You know, MLB just opened the season, but no spectators. And MLB is already in trouble. Miami has 21 people test positive, including 17 players. And then Phillies, St. Louis Cardinals, all three teams stopped playing. It's a tough situation for them, but Korea KBO has been ready and do their best to save the 2020 season. They make task force early March, and they inviting former director of disease control for the head of TF, and they made a very detailed COVID-19 manual, and repeatedly they adding stuff according to the situation develops. And KBO even sent the manual to MLB and MPB of Japan and even Spain soccer league, and it has all the details in there. Like the players has to check their temperatures twice a day and their conditions, and we media we always have to check the temperature, and we cannot eat together, and dining room at the stadium has shut down because of keeping distances and stuff. They're doing their best so far, and hopefully there's no positive, test result for the baseball players or staffs.
Here in Korea, of course, right? Because there have been cases back in the U.S. with the baseball, of course, with the Cardinals.
Right. Miami Marlins is the one who spread out, and Marlins played Phillies, and then Phillies players and staff got spread out, and then somehow St. Louis Cardinals staff and player were test positive, and all three teams got stopped. And Commissioner Manfred even warned the players union that if it keeps on going like this, the season has to be stopped.
They might halt the season early then?
Yeah, it's only 60-game season already, but they might.
I see. Ryan, with social distancing required at stadiums, like we talked about, sitting a seat apart if you're a family member and 2 seats apart if you're a stranger, and then of course we saw in the video people are not allowed to shout or scream, you can only silently cheer your team on. Do you suppose this will still make spectating these sports exciting for the fans?
I think so. I think, again, in a year that everything is just so surreal and so strange, I think just being able to be in the stadium is a big boost. And I was at the Seoul Elan game last night, and they had like the little plastic hand clappers that fans were using.
Yes.
So there are different ways that people are getting involved. I think with football specifically, it's really difficult because the supporters section that sits behind the goal sings the whole time. And so some ways teams have found ways around that, as they've had the supporters record songs, and then those are played over the loudspeakers. Which is, it's kind of a fun thing for the fans to have that experience. But as far as in stadium, I think right now we're in a novelty period where it's just nice to be able to do it again. And I think that will last for a long time because, again, this year's just been so strange and so difficult that just being able to go to the stadium and that experience of walking into the stadium together, of seeing it played live, I think that'll last for a long time. And hopefully for the rest of the season, to be honest, because I don't see it changing that much. But hopefully we can get up to 20%, 30% of fans coming in. And then just that shared communal experience, I think, will carry a lot of it. And I think it's also allowed for a lot of innovation. Like, sports fans have had to figure out new ways to connect with each other and with their team. Online watch parties have been great for KBO and for K-League, for example, because we were up and running before so many other leagues. And we've seen so many new fans come into Korean sports. And I've had friends back in the United States contact me and want to watch a game together while we're streaming online. And in that way, I think it's kind of a weird benefit because we've got new ways to connect. So there could be some positives coming out of it.
A silver lining on that cloud then.
Yeah.
Mr. Min, before we end, perhaps you'd like to give us a few words that you would like to share with those in the sports community about ways to keep safe, etc., with the pandemic, while enjoying, of course, their favorite sport like baseball or football.
Yeah, it's just you gotta stick to the rules, be positive, and do your best for yourself, for your family, and for the sports, and enjoy while you can.
Right. Yeah. What words would you like to share, Ryan, before you go? Very briefly.
Very briefly, just definitely follow the rules, stay positive, we're very close. Please wear a mask. If you're listening in the United States, please wear a mask. And just hopefully we'll be through this soon.
Right. Right. Thank you very much, Ryan, for being with us today. And Mr. Min, as always, thank you for being with us.
Sure. Thank you.
Right. On that note, we end Monday's edition of COVID-19. Be sure to join us again tomorrow as we look at the impact of a decrease in global population on the world economy amid the ongoing pandemic. In the meantime, do take care and do abide by safety precautions wherever you are. Thank you for watching.